Good morning, everybody from Sydney. Morning here, and rather early morning, I think, in Chengdu in China. Is that right, Terry?
Yes, 7 a.m. here.
Ooh. Okay, so today, everyone, we're going to be talking about learning Mandarin. And we're going to be talking about it from Terry's perspective. We're looking at the successes and the struggles. So let me introduce her for a moment, and also let me introduce myself for those of you who perhaps haven't been a part of our webinars before. I'm Tricia Carter. I'm an organisational psychologist focusing on cultural differences and cultural adjustment. And I help people to understand how culture might impact on the way that they work and the way that they adapt to living in another country. So my guest today is Terry Neal. And Terry is also an expert in learning, and we've had many interesting discussions about the process of learning a new country and a new culture. Terry, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, Terry? You can probably do a better job than me.
Okay, so I've been living here in Chengdu for 15 months. My husband and I have 4 adult children, and this is our empty nest adventure. And we've come here. He's a secondary school teacher working at international school, and I'm setting up a new educational services company with another Kiwi and his Chinese wife, who also have quite significant business experience here.
So Terry and I are both originally from New Zealand, so you may notice some similarities in our accents. Yes, and yeah, as I said, Terry has a background in education and is an international consultant and has worked in business development for education, working with vocational education in New Zealand, and also some open education online work, haven't you, Terry?
Yes, quite a lot of flexible learning work.
Thank you. That is the correct term, flexible learning. So that's partly why, as we were interacting about how she was learning the language, that's partly why I wanted to get her to share with the members of the Cultural Intelligence Collective, because it is difficult learning a language, and for many people there are resources available, but it's if you don't know what's out there, or you can't envisage how you might learn using those resources, it can be a bit of a challenge. So I thought Terry's experience might help us all to step into that zone a little bit. So as she said, right now she's living in Chengdu, and that's where the pandas live, which I guess you've visited many times with guests, have you?
Yes, it tends to be the first thing that we take visitors to see. I think it's what Chengdu's most famous for outside China.
It is very beautiful, isn't it?
Yes, and I'm not really an animal person, but they are very, very cute.
So let's have a think about what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about why someone might learn Chinese, and specifically why Terry might learn Chinese, how she's gone about it, what resources have been helpful, and what strategies and advice she would give to somebody else. So let's start with the why component, because motivation is really important. So there are a number of motivators here. Tell us, Terry, about which one of these things motivated you and how that motivation might have changed as you've gone on the journey.
So one of the things that Raymond and I decided when we came to China was that we wanted to try and be part of China rather than be immersed just in the expat community. And that's one of the reasons why I've chosen the work approach that I've chosen. And obviously, as part of that, being able to speak the language is a real advantage. It's also the idea that in everyday life, it's easier if you can understand when somebody tells you how much you have to pay. It's easier if you can tell a taxi driver where you want to go. And it's easier in a restaurant if you can ask for the bill. So that everyday life thing, and I think that's been the most fruitful in terms of my being able to stay motivated around learning Chinese, because that's where most of my successes lie. I still dream of being able to understand what people are saying in business conversations, but that's one of the more discouraging things. And if I focused on that, I would totally lose motivation. Another thing that was a factor for me is that there are a lot of Chinese people in New Zealand. And for example, our next door neighbours that have moved in just before we left New Zealand is a young Chinese couple with a child, and her parents live with them 6 months a year. And one of the dreams I have in my own retirement is being able to support people like that learn English, and being able to say to them, don't give me that I'm too old to learn English line, because I didn't start learning Chinese until I was in my mid-50s. And linked to that, there's possibly future opportunities in New Zealand. Sorry, Trish?
And you've always wanted to learn a language.
Absolutely, that's the last thing. Ever since I was at school and enjoyed learning French, I gave learning Māori, the language of the Indigenous people in New Zealand, a go, and would have liked to have spent more time in that. And to be honest, when I go back, having learned what I've learned about learning a language, I may pick that up again.
Yeah, that would be a plus too. So I guess from that, your strategies would be to find out what motivates you. So for those of you who are thinking about learning a language, and recognizing that the motivation might change as you go on the journey, because you've found that from your husband's perspective, Terry, you can actually get by without Chinese. Is that right?
Yes, because he teaches in English, he has colleagues that are speaking English, colleagues that translate and support where there's a need for Chinese speaking. But he, as I said, also would like to integrate as much as possible. So he does interact with people using tools where it means that they don't have to fit in with his inability to speak Chinese as much as possible. He was wanting to learn, and he's picked up a small amount and can understand the numbers quite well, but he just lacks the time to invest. So a couple of the tools that he is able to use is this one called Baidu Translate. And I've just noticed that it can even interpret please drive straight for a few minutes when I meant straight. So you can put the English in and it will bring up the Chinese as here, but also you can talk into it, and the locals often hand this over to you and want you to speak English, that they will then pick up and hear the Chinese. So this is actually a Chinese tool that is very good at translating. And because we made the choice, one could argue the mistake of purchasing phones when we got to China, not realizing that it would lack a lot of the basic tools on it that we are used to in an English-speaking country, this came with our phones and has proved invaluable.
Okay. And WeChat?
Yeah, WeChat, you can't live in China without being on WeChat. It's sort of Facebook, Messenger, bank payment, and website advertising all rolled into one. But it's got this brilliant feature where if you put, so if I get Chinese sent to me, I can just press translate and English will come up, and vice versa if a Chinese person gets English sent to them. So for example, we have someone that we use to drive us to the airport, and we use this facility with him. Well, Raymond does. I now write to him in Chinese, but Raymond uses this facility to communicate with him. I went to a new hairdresser, and it was beyond my Chinese to communicate some of the complexity of what we needed to talk about. And we just exchanged contacts on WeChat and had talked for about half an hour, just messaging back and forth.
Cool. And you can see the example in the screen there of a message that Terry sent and then translated. And then your husband, I understand, is also very good at this component.
Yeah, well, it does amuse us sometimes. We will be talking and I'm trying to communicate in my limited Chinese, and particularly having trouble understanding what the person is saying back. But because I'm so focused on the words, I'm missing a lot of that other stuff that we rely on for communication. And then Raymond will just work out what they're saying from the body language and what they're expressing with their hands and things. And it makes us laugh that that's so much more effective. That's getting less so as my language gets better, but particularly early on, that was our more common experience.
And always good to laugh.
Yeah.
So if you've always wanted to learn a language, what might be some of the ways that you have found you can learn best? So here's a quote from a famous educational expert.
Yes. Yeah, well, this is the three things that when Trish asked me what my advice was, these were the three things that I thought were most important. It's that, and the first one is just so much the most important, that and it's the advantage of learning as an adult rather than a child, is that we are able to control what we do. We don't have to impress anybody. We're not there to fit in with anybody else's system. And we know ourselves. We have a lot of experience to draw on that can inform the process that is best for us. And we can say, well, I don't really like doing that. I'm not going to keep going with that, but I really enjoy that, so I'm going to do more of that. And then the other two things are that there's amazing technologies out there that can transform it, and we'll talk about that a bit more. And then the experts, talk about when learning language, you really need to consider all four of these elements. And I think it's tempting when you are learning Chinese to think, oh, I won't do reading and writing because the characters are so hard. But in my experience, and I was like that at the beginning, in my experience, it's been some of the most fun, some of the most rewarding, and it's helped me understand how I learned English so much through reading. And you cannot read Chinese in Pinyin because the same sounds are used so often. You need the characters to help you differentiate which sh you're talking about.
Yeah. And I have to say that's my experience when I was in China, that I tried to learn to speak and to listen without trying to learn to read and write. One was very aware that I was missing half the story. So just a bit of background for those of you who might not know. Pinyin is the Roman alphabet version of Chinese. So it takes the sounds and puts them into letters, as those of us who speak English would be familiar with letters. So it's a system using letters to help those of us who've come from outside China to recognize a word. But as Terry says, it's a limited system. So it is probably important for people when they're first learning, but long term, it's not something that's sustainable in terms of deepening your understanding of Chinese. So let's have a look at some of the technology tools that Terry has discovered and experimented with, and how they've worked for her. So the top resources. First of all, we're going to look at Miming. So tell us about Miming, Terry.
Okay, so this is an online teaching company. They're based in Taiwan. At the moment, they specialize in teaching Chinese and teaching English, particularly to Chinese speakers. I investigated a number of options when we were in New Zealand before we even came to China, because I wanted to start learning straight away, and I wanted to be able to start learning in New Zealand and be able to keep going in China. And I also wanted the flexibility, and I'm so glad that I did that. I know several of Raymond's colleagues started learning Chinese here, but they found it too difficult to travel to where their teacher was. They struggled with fitting in the time, because a 1 hour lesson turned into a 2 or 3 hour lesson by the time they were traveling. I can sit here in my pajamas, having got up 5 minutes beforehand, and have a lesson. And I also like the fact that if something crops up, I can cancel the lesson up to 12 hours beforehand. or book a new one. So the flexibility, I think, is one of the biggest advantages of being online. I chose this company because of the resources that they had. The other companies I investigated used Skype, but they didn't have learning materials as the base for their lessons and that I could review afterwards. I also chose this company because the way they wanted me to pay was more flexible too. And they weren't asking for X dollars per month. I just purchased a number of lessons that I could use in whatever time frame I wanted. Other things that I like about learning this way is that I get different people teaching me. I have a main tutor, but sometimes when she's not available, I get this other person and they just bring a slightly different perspective. They pick up on different pronunciation mistakes that I'm making. They help me feel more confident if they do understand me, and they will introduce different idiom that I could use as well, and also different cultural experiences that they share with me. One of the things I like about tutoring too is that after each lesson you give feedback and they give me feedback, so I get a sense of how I'm going on my pronunciation. I was so thrilled when one tutor jumped from giving me 3 to 4 on my pronunciation because she's quite tough. It also means that I have had one tutor that I really didn't like, and I could give him a very low score and communicate that I didn't want him again. So it does give me some power over who I'm connecting with. This tutoring has this sort of algorithm that works out in response to the feedback and what tutors say about my progress, what material I should work with. I really like the one-to-one human part. So many people, when they hear that I learn online, assume that there's no human being involved, but it's a real live person talking to me, having conversations, sharing their life with me, and helping me with the conversation, really. At the beginning, there was quite a lot of English, not much Chinese. Now we speak nearly all in Chinese, except for needing to explain a grammar, sort of grammatical structure. Or occasionally where, as a human being, I just want to connect to that person. And I say, oh, I'm going to just say this in English or else we'll be here all day. The system introduces grammar and sentence structure well and builds up my vocab. One of the things that is really brilliant is that I cannot just, so I download the resource with the teacher's writing from the lesson all over it, which is very easy to review, but I can also listen to the recording and how they pronounce things and how similar or different it is when I'm pronouncing things. And referring back to the speaking, listening, reading, writing, this system is good for 3 of the 4 components. It doesn't help me with my writing, except I now write my feedback to my tutor in Chinese.
Oh, well done. So here's a screenshot of tutoring, and this is part of the resources, is that right?
That's right. So this this lesson was about renting an apartment, and the woman on the left is the landlady and the woman on the right is the one that's wanting to rent the apartment. So I you can see how I read it, but then the new words are in red, with the pinyin underneath. And the green there is the interesting grammatical structure that they're introducing here. So, yeah, you sort of got this color coding thing going on. Okay. And I'd like to point out the pinyin in the blue, the landlady's box, which, that's right, thanks Trish, where it's yang, chong wu, and we'll refer to that later because it's an example of how when I was reviewing this lesson beforehand. That's the other thing, I can look at the materials up to 12 hours beforehand. So I actually study up beforehand so that I can work out any words that I don't know. So I didn't know yang, chong wu. So I used my dictionary, which is another key resource. And I'll show you in the next slides how I do that. So this is, in fact, it might be good to go to that now, Trish. So here you can see that at the top is Chang and Yang and Chong, and then I've just written U. And so I input the other two, and now I've just input this third one. Down below on the left, you can see that character matches, but the other 4 characters, the system says, maybe Terry, you meant those ones. And then I select the right one and go done. And then I can, if we go to the next slide, Trish, see what those words mean in English. So you can see that yang is support by for raise, and then chong u is pet. So what it meant was back in the rental lesson that you can't have a pet.
Right. So sometimes there's a bit of detective work that you have to do to work things out.
Yeah, well, it's really looking something up in a dictionary, but it's using the search facility, and it's also using the fact that you can write. I also sometimes, like we were at the market and there were these fruits that I didn't know what they were. And so I asked the woman to say it, and then I wasn't sure what she'd said. So then I asked her to write it, and then I knew what the fruit was.
Right.
So it's a good way to get people to input. Although one of the challenges is they write it so quickly and messily that Playco doesn't always know which one they are meaning.
But Playco does have the audio facility, doesn't it? So
that's right. So if I'd clicked on Young, it would have taken me to another screen which has a little arrow at the top, and then you can hear how Young is pronounced. And I sometimes put in what's the English word and get the Chinese translation, although that's quite problematic because often there's many different words. You know, just like if you put young and you could get raise, support, have in English, I don't always know which is the Chinese one to say. And that's also why it's nice to be able to write the characters, because that makes things so much more specific.
Yeah. And so for this Playco, it's all 4 of the components of speaking, listening, reading, and writing.
That's right, because I do write on there quite regularly to find out what words mean. So if we're driving around and I see something, a character that I'm not sure what it is, like we're at the restaurant and there's something on the menu, then I will write it in there to find out what it is too.
Yeah. Okay. So other resources that you've used, tell us about these, because these get quite fascinating.
Okay, so Anki Droid, which I wish I'd discovered earlier. I only discovered it 3 months ago, and if I'd discovered it 15 months ago, we would have been a lot further ahead. So this is a online flashcard system. It's free for most people. It costs about 25 US dollars if you have an iPhone, but I would say it would be money well spent. It uses spaced repetition system, which is really saying that probably people like you, Trish, psychologists, I guess they are, have researched how our memory works and found out that as we learn things, the gap between needing to revise gets bigger and bigger, but you don't want it too big. So that you want to revise something just before your brain's going to forget it, not ages before you're going to forget it, or else that's inefficient, but not just after you've forgotten it, because then you have to go back and back to square one. So this spaced repetition has somebody's programmed in how to revise things just before you forget them. And I just love it. I can't rave about it enough, actually. And I use it in 3 ways. I'm making my own cards for vocabulary, and we'll see some examples of those soon. I have found some existing cards for the way that I was already learning the Chinese characters, and I bought some cards from this guy, Gabriel Weiner, down below, from Fluent Forever, who introduced me to Anki Droid, and I bought his pronunciation trainer. So these are supporting speaking, listening, reading, and writing for me. When I make the cards, I get audios from native speakers for the pronunciation of words, and I'm going to move to getting my language exchange partner to pronounce sentences for me so that I have audios from a native speaker for sentences. And then I use Google image search to find the images for cards. And again, Gabe, advice here is for the words to, rather than say, for example, wa means dig, and then search for dig and look at images for that. If you search for wa with the right character, you get images that mean digging, but I also got images that were of people picking their noses. So now I know that Chinese people don't pick their noses, they dig their noses. And so that subtle nuance that you can get from searching the images with the Chinese character and using those for your cards.
And also, so we'll go on, you can start explaining this. There's another point that I'd like to make, but I think I'll wait until we come to some of your pictures. So tell us about this one.
Cool. Okay, so this is a character which means foot or jiao. And when I use the flashcards, this character comes up. I press on show answer and it goes to the next screen. And you can see those are 3 images that I found when I put that character into Google image search. And the opinion here is down the bottom. And I also have another, this same group of sort of information that I put into Anki Droid creates 2 other flashcard patterns. One is where the image comes up, and I have to generate in my mind that it's jiao. I'm created these flashcards without any English so that I miss out that sort of translation step in my head and aspire to become more like a native speaker. But having the images still means that I know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And there's also another card which says spell this word with the picture in jiao, and I have to generate the Chinese character, which we'll see an example of next.
Oh.
I also have the International Phonetic Alphabet down there, which helps me with the pronunciation. Those characters next to it mean that it's a noun. And then on the right is something that's specific to Chinese, which is what's called measure words. And so if you have 1 foot, you have yi zhi, which is that one. And if you have a pair of feet, you have yi shuang. And I use these cards to remind me about that. It's a bit like people who learn French. You would want to have some way of remembering whether it was le or la for the pronoun.
Yeah. Tell us about these timing things as well.
Okay, so what this is exactly what I was saying about the spaced repetition. If I didn't remember this, I would click again, and if I did remember it, I would press good, and then it will come back in 2 days. So this is because jiao is a reasonably new word for me, that there's only these 2 options. In the next slide, you can see that you get 3 options, and the number of days extends as I've been better and better at remembering it in the past. Okay, so this is an example of where the picture comes up, and to other people looking at this card, they might not realize that this is the concept of dream. But because I created the card, it means that to me. And a couple of times I have actually looked at pictures and thought, gosh, I don't know what I meant here. But then I just go and add another one.
Right.
So it's, it's all part of what's working for me. If it works for me, it's fine. If it doesn't work for me, and it doesn't matter if anybody else in the world understands it or not.
Yeah. So you remember, what do you remember first? Do you remember the character or the opinion or the pronunciation? Or all three?
It varies. It varies because I'm learning the characters. Sometimes when the characters come up,
Character.
I sort of know because there are actually a lot of patterns with Chinese characters that once you start, there's pronunciation patterns. We feel like there's no phonetic aspect to it at all, but there is actually a bit of phonetic stuff going on as well as frenetic. But for this one, I think Meng Xiang. So I thought the word, and that's really what I'm trying to do, is to have the concept of dream without having to say the word dream. And this is an example here. So again, I've got the International Phonetic Alphabet. I've said it's a noun. I've said what the measure word is. But Gabe also suggests putting a personal connection. So my dream is to be a global consultant as well as a great mum, nana, and wife. So I put that in there just because by making a personal connection, I then am more likely to remember it. That's, again, research about how our brains work.
Absolutely.
You might be able to
that's
talk about that more.
That's the thing that I was going to say, that the neuroscience is quite strong about when we remember something that has an emotional attachment, we remember it more quickly and it's embedded more firmly within our brain. So that's why we tend to remember things when we were, deeply emotional, deeply happy, rejoicing, or very scared or worried about something. So those memories are often very easy to recall. So doing this would put it into the easy to recall things, because for you, these are emotional things. Just refresh us on these again, because there's more options here.
That's right. So if I couldn't remember it, I'd press again. For me, this was good, but it's not really easy. Okay. So there are some things that as they get easier and easier, you just press easy, and that makes it a bigger gap. And actually, I'd like to talk more about that when we go to the next ones, because okay. So this is from a different pack. That last one was the cards that I'm making for myself. This is, observant people might see that it says James W. High up the top. So it's a different group of cards. These are the ones that I downloaded from the web that already existed. This whoever created these had made 3,000 cards already, which would translate to 6,000 sort of flashcards. And this is where what's the Chinese character for song. So if we move on to the next one, imagine I've clicked show answer, and you can see that there are 4 options here. And so this is G, and when I look at song, I write the character on my knee. My husband laughs at me because he can tell what I'm doing, because my fingers sort of go zhung, zhung, zhung on my knee. And this is, so if I can, sometimes I press hard when I haven't quite got the tone right, but I've got everything else right, and easy when I feel like I just know it really, really well and could almost picture it in my head before we came across. So it's, again, it's not, you just be really honest with yourself, because it's about remembering. I'm not trying to impress anybody. Nobody else knows what's going on here at all. So it's being very honest, but also making up your own rules as you go. It's that whole thing, I'm in control, and learning about learning for myself.
So as Terry implied there, and for those of you who perhaps haven't started learning Mandarin yet, you might not realize, but there are tones. So this little flat line on the top of is implying that it's g rather than g or g or g. Did I get them right?
It sounded very good, Trish.
So there are 4 different tones. So if we get the tone wrong, then it changes the whole meaning of the word. So it is an important thing to remember. So you're being honest with yourself about, have I remembered that character? Have I remembered what the word means? Have I remembered the pinyin? And have I got the tone right? So yeah, the sound.
That's right.
So when you're remembering it, if you push this, do you hear the sound, or is there some...
No, that takes you to a link about how the word is used in
okay.
sort of sentences and things. I think I don't use that feature.
Okay. So somewhere there is a pronunciation though.
Not on, not in these cards.
Okay.
In my cards,
Yep.
yeah, maybe if we go back to the Mengxiang one, you might
Yep.
be able to see. Yeah, that little arrow
Oh,
there
yeah. Got
is
you.
the audio that I downloaded from Volvo.com.
Okay. So you
Yes,
must,
I would like it if there were, but because these were already created
yeah.
and I haven't gone through and added the audios.
So there's a bit of work to be done here with the things, but it's worth it, you find.
Yeah, yeah, and I have. I'm creating one set, but two sets already existed,
Right.
and you can use other sets. And actually, Playco has flashcards in it as well. So, and a friend of mine, actually, the friend that I asked for help on this slide for the books with audio, he uses the Playco flashcards. But they don't have the spaced repetition system, so I don't like them so much.
Right. So what about these other
Uh,
resources? The other thing.
yeah, so books with audio, and again, this is part of the modern world. So there are books
Is that these ones?
available in, yes, those ones. So the one on the left uses 150 basic characters to write stories, and any other characters that are used are presented on the right of the page with the pinyin and the English translation. And the ones on the right use 600 basic characters, and particularly the series on the right. So there's red ones with 300, and I'm now doing the blue ones with 600. Are really interesting stories. Like there was one about these children that ran away because they believed this traditional Chinese story about a shepherd and sort of falling in love with, and then they end up being stars in the Milky Way. But it's a an actual Chinese story. And there was another one about a son that ran away. They're not all about people running away. A son that ran away because he had to work too hard at school and his mother's expectations, but then he realized that why his mother was so wise. So they're quite interesting stories.
And you're getting a bit
rather than
you're getting a bit of cultural background as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's probably that's really a shorter way of saying what I was trying to say. And so then they have CDs at the back. I've put those audios on my cell phone, so I listen to these stories over and over again when I'm walking to the bus, when I'm riding a bike, and that's something I guess I wanted to say, because the flashcards, it's about weaving this into your normal life. So I review those when I'm sitting on the bus. So I walk to the bus listening to the audio, then I sit on the bus and revise my flashcards. I revise the flashcards when I go to the bathroom. I revise my flashcards when I wake up in the morning and have a cup of tea in bed. So it's fitting it into your normal life so that it's not something sort of out there that you're doing extra. It's easy to pop it in and forming these language learning habits.
And watching TV, part of your normal life?
Yeah, it's something reasonably recently that I've started doing, because I felt like my Chinese might be good enough. It isn't really, but it's amazing how much you can pick up from body language, what's going on. I've been watching this Chinese historical drama, and I just love the costuming and the cultural insights. And I'm still not quite sure who poisoned the hero. I thought it was the smug guy that keeps birds in cages. And just the first time he came onto the scene, you could tell he was a baddie. But now I think I'm pretty sure it was his aunt who wanted her son to be the heir for the family wealth. So, I really am in a fog most of the time. But I pick up phrases, and because in China they have Mandarin characters, Chinese characters along the bottom, because not everybody speaks Mandarin, I can practice my reading as well.
And for those of you who don't know, that's the amazing thing about Chinese, that the characters relate across different dialects, different languages
Yes.
to us who are listening, which is quite mind-blowing. But yeah. Okay, and you have a language partner as well.
Yes, again, this it's taken a few goes. There's a website, I'm not sure what it's called, Language Exchange, I think. So, and now I just put my profile up on there, and quite a few people got in touch with me because there are more Chinese wanting to learn English here than English people wanting to learn Chinese. But quite a number of the first one I met, but my Chinese wasn't really good enough, I don't think, for us to have a good conversation. And the second, third, fourth people seemed keen, but weren't actually following up and replying to WeChat messages from me. And then
there was
about
no
2 months ago, yeah. Well, people are busy, and you can put your profile up there and then think, do I really want to do this?
Yeah.
But this young woman had tried some other people and really wanted to meet face to face. And my Chinese is now good enough that I can understand a reasonable amount, and I can say quite a lot. And also I got some advice from someone who lives in Sydney, actually, Trish, who was here in Chengdu translating for some property developers. And she said that she found it really helpful to say, we're only going to speak English for this long, and we're only going to speak Chinese for this long. And that's worked really well. And my language partner is amazing. Her English is better than my Chinese, and she hardly needs, we just sort of have a normal conversation when we're speaking the English. But with the Chinese, she's becoming the master of synonyms. She didn't understand that. Okay, I'll try and say it like this. I'll try and say it like that. And again, the cultural insights are amazing. She's talked about her family. And what it meant for her parents to have a second child, how devastated they were when the second child was also a girl. And quite heart-wrenching stuff, but just such insight into what it's really like in China.
Yeah.
I feel quite privileged, actually. Yeah. And we're meeting once a week between my work and her work. She's on her way to work, and it's around my lunchtime. And both staying very keen. And I'm just starting writing to her on WeChat as well, because I've decided that writing was the weakest part of my language learning program.
Okay, excellent. So you've worked out what works for you, and that's really one of the big pieces of advice, that you think people have to work out what works for them. So we're summarizing from a language learning perspective. We need to think about, what do we want to learn? How do I learn best? And as you go along, is it still working well? You might need to use different methods.
Yeah, because it changes over time. As you build more skills, different things become useful.
Yeah. Try it and see. Get over yourself. Come on, explain this one, Terry, because it might not work for other people.
Yeah, well, I think it's particularly the speaking out there. Like when I first started, nobody understood what on earth I was saying. They just looked blankly at me. I was quite offended when we were in a restaurant and this woman said to me, "You don't need to speak Chinese. I can speak English." And then it turned out that her English really wasn't very good. And I thought, I don't want my Chinese to be worse than your English. But it was the way of getting feedback. And now I know that people are understanding me because they're so different in their response. I just had a taxi driver this week tell me in Chinese that my Chinese was very good, which made my day. So you just have to get past this "I've got to do it right" thing that we sometimes have as adults, and be like a child. Children don't worry. And I'm very good at getting over myself with strangers. Sometimes I struggle a little bit with people that I know. And that's what's great about a language exchange partner, is that that's the deal.
Yeah.
That's why you're together.
You've spoken about making it a part of your routine. and making it fun. So these are Terry's tips and strategies. So thank you so much.
And I just like to follow up.
Yeah.
Make it fun. If it's not fun, get rid of it.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to stop the recording now, but if there's anybody who's listening to this, we'll take questions from people who are on the line with us now. But if you're listening to this down the track, here's Terry's email and my email, obviously. And if you've got questions, please feel free to email her, and she can give you some further tips or share other learnings. So Terry, thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been really interesting, and good on you for all your hard work.
Thanks, Trish.